The family forced their daughter to marry a very old stranger for a cow. What happened next? Bitter Creek, Kansas, late 1800s. The land was dry to the bone, cracked like old leather, beneath a sky that had not cried in months. Dust clung to every window pane, every lung. The cattle were dying one by one. And for the poor families of Bitter Creek, the question was no longer how tall of, but what to trade to survive. In the kitchen of a sagging farmhouse, Jacob Monroe sat at the table, fingers steepled, face carved from years off worry. Mary Monroe stood by the stove, stirring a pot of nothing. Eliza, their youngest, just 18, swept the dirt from the floor. The hem of her dress worn thin. Her hands were calloused, but her eyes were not yet dulled. Jacob cleared his throat. I spoke with Caleb Archer. Mary froze. Eliza stopped sweeping. Silence thudded through the room. You mean the cattleman? Eliza asked cautiously. He offered to cancel our debt, Jacob said. And he's willing to give us a pregnant cow? We can rebuild. At what price? Eliza asked, though some part of her already knew. Jacob met her eyes, steady, cold. You'll marry him? Eliza's broom slipped from her hands. He's old enough to be my father, she cried, stepping back. Hayes, 44. You are 18. It is legal, and it will save this family, Jacob replied, Asif, reading from a ledger. Her voice trembled. Please, father, do not do this. Jacob rose, voice hard. A cow will keep your mother fed. It will keep your brothers from going hungry. That is the cost, and you will pay it. Eliza turned to her mother. Mama. Mary did not meet her eyes. We do what we must, she whispered. And that was that. The wedding was held in the small white church on the edge of town. No flowers, no music, just the creak of pews and the weight of eyes. Eliza wore her mother-sold dress, yellowed lace, and faded ribbon. Her hands trembled in her lap. Her hair had been braided too tightly by one of her older sisters, as if to stop her from thinking too much. Caleb Archer stood tall in his black coat, shoulders broad and face unreadable. He spoke little, nodded when told, signed where needed. He did not smile. The townsfolk watched from their benches, whispering, She's just a girl married for a cow. Poor thing, when the preacher said, You may kiss the bride. Only nodded once, then offered Eliza his arm. She took it because she had to. Outside, a single cow moved softly as they left the church. That night, in the large room of Caleb's Stone Ranch house, Lisa sat on the edge of a bed too big and a dress too old. In a life that no longer felt like her own, Caleb stood by the window. The lantern flickered beside him. He did not move. I will not touch you, he said, voice gravel low. You are my wife-in-law, Lee, unless you say otherwise. He took a blanket from the bed and walked to the chair near the window. Settling in with heaviness of a man who had long ago stopped hoping, Eliza watched him for a moment, then lay down fully dressed, eyes wide in the dark. Her heart beat wild in her chest. She had feared something worse. Yet this silence, this void was almost stranger. Outside, the prairie wind howled, rattling the shutters like bones. She turned her face to the pillow and let the tears come. And in the dark she whispered, not to him, not to herself, but to the night. For a cow my father sold me, but this man. Who is he? A stranger made of ice, or a heart that once burned and forgot how? The first morning at Archer Ranch greeted Elisa with the kind of silence Sithit pressed against the ribs. She sat up in the wide, unfamiliar bed, blanket stiff and cold from the night. Through the frosted window, the horizon stretched wide and dry. The prairie still suffocating under the weight of the drought. Somewhere beyond the hills, coyotes howled their mournful chorus. The ranch was vast, but it felt hollow. Caleb was gone before sunrise. She hearted the faint clump of his boots, the front door shutting softly but firmly. Like a man trained not to disturb anyone, even in his own home. She wandered the house in her thin nightgown, trailing her fingers along furniture-polished tuckline. No photos, no flowers, no scent of food, save for a single loaf, left on the table beside butter wrapped in linen. Breakfast was quiet. lunch lonelier still. By the third day, she stopped waiting for conversation. Caleb worked from dawn to dusk, inspecting cattle, repairing fences, managing hands, who looked at Eliza with awkward sympathy, but said nothing. He ate alone. He read alone. He slept in their room across the hall from hers. Door always closed, light dim. It was not cruelty, it was distance. Yet town was worse. When she rode in with a list of goods in Caleb's wagon, all eyes followed her. Whispers curled through the wooden walls like smoke. That's her, Caleb's girl. The one he married for a cow? Pretty enough, but barely grown. Poor thing. Or maybe clever. The storekeeper's wife offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. A group of young men stared too long. Luke Carter, whom she once danced with at a harvest festival, snorted as he passed her in aisle. Did not peg you for the livestock type, Eliza? She held her chin high and paid in silence, but inside, the words cut deep. That night, Eliza stood by the kitchen window long after dark. The wind had picked up. A storm threatened the north ridge. Her tea had gone cold. She did not hear him approach. Caleb set a steaming cup beside hers without a word, then turned away. She stared after him as he disappeared down the hall. It was spearmint, the kind her mother used to brew when she cried herself to sleep. Small gestures followed, silent ones. She found her gloves. Torn from gathering firewood, stitched and mended on her windowsill. Her broken necklace, once discarded in frustration, reappeared on her dresser, the chain repaired with silver wire. A book of poetry, the same one she had admired in town months ago, appeared beside her pillow, with a red ribbon marking a page. At first, she thought it coincidence, but she began to see patterns in the quiet. Caleb never asked her what she wanted, but somehow he gave it anyway, and still they hardly spoke. Until one night, when the air was so still, even the trees held their breath. She heard music, not the wind, not a fox's cry, something gentler. She crept through the hall barefoot, pulling her shawl tight as she pushed open the front door. There, under the porch light, sat Caleb Archer, legs spread, elbows on his knees, a harmonica in his hands. He was not playing for an audience. He was not aware she was watching. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the last hint of sun faded to ash. The tune he played was raw and aching. Eliza did not know the song, but she knew the feeling. Grief. Caleb's brow furrowed as he played, lips trembling slightly at the edges. When he stopped, he held the harmonica in both hands, staring at it like it carried a memory he could not forget. Then, quietly, he whispered, "Mary would have liked that one." Eliza froze. She backed into the shadows bare he saw her, but her heart beat loud in her chest. For the first time, she saw him. Not as the man who bought her freedom with cattle and coin, not as the quiet stranger who lived beside her, but as a man once broken. And suddenly, she did not feel so alone. Eliza had grown used to silence, but not to curiosity. In one cold morning, as she was putting away linens in the bedroom Caleb rarely used, she noticed a drawer slightly ajar in the old wooden armwire. Something about its crooked angle called to her. Inside lay a neatly folded handkerchief, old but carefully kept. Embroidered into one corner, barely faded, was a single letter M. Beneath it was a broken chain, tangled and dulled with age. A locket, its clasp cracked, but inside it held the tiny sketch of a woman and a child drawn in soft pencil strokes. The woman looked Tobe in her 20s, her hair pinned in a way Eliza had only seen in daguerreotypes. The little girl was perhaps 6, smiling wide with a missing tooth. Elisa's breath caught. She closed the drawer slowly, the locket pressed in her hand like it might burn through her skin. That evening, after supper, she found Caleb by the hearth, his usual place. The fire cast long shadows up the walls. He was sharpening a blade slowly, rhythmically. She stood in the doorway, the handkerchief in her hands. "I found this," she said softly in the armchair. Caleb paused. His gaze met hers, and in thought, one glance, something inside her shifted. The sternness was there, yes, but behind it was a weight that sagged the edges of his eyes. A sorrow that had nothing to do with her. He did not speak. He simply looked back at the fire. Eliza did not press. Later that night, she asked Alma, the older woman who helped cook and clean at the ranch, a sharp-tongued widow who had known Bitter Creek longer than most. Alma's expression darkened. She set down her spoon. "You're his wife now. You have a right to know. But it's a wound that never closed, girl." She told the story slowly. Caleb Archer had once been different, warmer, livelier. Married to a schoolteacher named Margaret, they had a little girl named Clara. One winter, a gang of outlaws passed through Bitter Creek. They robbed a store, then headed toward the hills. Caleb was away buying supplies. When he returned, the house had been ransacked. Margaret and Clara were gone. He tracked the men across frozen land for 4 days. When he found them, he killed them all. "But it didn't bring them back," Alma said, voice low. "And the man who returned wasn't Thesm." Eliza listened in silence, her hands cold around her tea. That night, she could not sleep. She thought of the harmonica, the glove, the way Caleb never looked anyone in the eye for too long. A week passed, then 2. On evening, Caleb left the house after dinner without a word. Eliza, moved by something she could not name, followed from a distance. Keeping to the tree knee, the air was still, the moon pale and high. He walked to a small fenced plot beneath the cottonwoods. It's just outside the edge of the ranch, a simple graveyard, 2 headstones side by side. He knelt before them, removing his hat. Eliza stayed hidden behind a tree, thebark, rough against her cheek. "I am sorry," Caleb said softly. "I should have been there. I should have protected you." He ran a hand through his hair, fingers trembling. "I am not the man I was. I do not know if I ever will be again." His voice cracked. Eliza felt a sharp pain rise in her chest. Her eyes stung. Shahad feared him, pied herself. But now, she saw not a monster, not a captor, but a man living in a house of ghosts, fighting to keep them from swallowing him whole. She turned away before Heck could see her tears. And that night, lying in bed, while the wind whispered against the shutters, Eliza thought not of cows or contracts, but of a man playing sad songs alone, and a girl trying to learn the rhythm of his silence. The days passed with quiet grace. Bitter Creek remained dry. Thuin still carried dust across the fields, but something inside the Archer ranch was shifting softly, slowly, like thawing earth after winter. It began with a tea. One morning, Eliza noticed Caleb working by the southern fence. His back to the house, sleeves rolled high, sweat on his brow. The sun was cruel that day, pressing down on the land like a curse. Without thinking, she poured hot tea into a chipped porcelain cup, added honey, and walked out barefoot across the porch. He did not hear her approach. When she held the cup out to him, he paused. For a moment, she thought he might refuse, but he took it. Their fingers brushed. He nodded just once and drank in silence. No words, but something, unspoken, passed between them, carried on the steam. Later that week, she noticed the silver chain on her nightstand. It was her necklace broken weeks ago. The clasp snapped when Shahad tripped, carrying a basket of firewood. She had left it in a drawer, thinking it lost to time. Now it lay neatly coiled, the clasp repaired, polished to a gentle shine. He had not said a word. She did not ask. But that night, she wore it again. One afternoon she knelt in the dry garden behind the house. Dirt beneath her nails, hands busy planting marigolds and lavender in empty beds. Alma had warned her. He does not let anyone touch that soil. It was hers, Margaret's. But Eliza could not stop herself. When Caleb walked past, he paused. Their eyes met. He said nothing, just looked at the flowers, then at her, and nodded before walking on. The next morning, she found a small bag of seeds, wild roses left beside her gloves. The ranch was still quiet, still ruled by routines and long silences, but Eliza no longer felt invisible within it. She cooked not just because she must, but because Caleb would leave his plate clean and murmur, "Thank you." She stitched curtains' fourth study window and found them hung without comment. She began humming while she worked, and sometimes, just sometimes, She thought she caught Caleb listening. She no longer saw herself as the girl traded for a cow. She saw herself as a woman slowly being seen. Then came the day of the accident. She had been learning to ride alone, stubbornly refusing to ask Caleb for help. The horse spooked at a snake-gnarled creek bed. Elisa's foot slipped from the stirrup, and the world turned. She hit the ground hard. The next thing she remembered was Caleb's voice, sharp, panicked, as he dismounted and rushed to her side. "Eliza, no. Stay still, damn it. Do not move." She tried to speak, but pain shot through her side. He lifted her arms steady but shaking, and carried her all the way to the house. Elma hovered in the doorway, eyes wide. "I will fetch bandages." "No," Caleb barked. "I will do it," he said. Eliza gently on the couch, brushing dirt from her face with calloused fingers. "Why were you riding alone?" His voice cracked with anger. "You could have—" He stopped, breathed, then softer. "I thought I had enough fear left in me. Thought I buried it with them." Eliza blinked through tears. "But I was wrong," he whispered. "I was terrified." He looked at her then, really looked. "I was afraid of losing you." She reached up, touched the edge of his hand. Neither of them spoke after that, not for a long time. But the silence felt different now. It felt like something growing. The Sunday sun bore down on the dusty streets of Bitter Creek, turning the wooden facades of shops into glare-boards of heat and shadow. Outside, wagons creaked, horses snorted, dust rose in lazy swirls. Butonside Miller's general store. The air was colder than usual, cut with judgment, suspicion, murmurs. Elisa Pesht opened the door, the bell tinkling too sharply in her ears. She carried a woven basket, flour and sugar among the items listed on the slip she clutched, and walked to the counter with her head held high, though her chest felt tight as a cage. She had come to buy rations, simple supplies, things a young bride should not have to defend. Yet every eye in the store flickered to her. Whispers rippled behind her back. She was nothing until she married him. Traded a wedding dress for a cow. I heard she barely speaks to him, probably waiting for him to die. And she tried to steady herself. Ignore them. She counted out her coins, the metal clinking louder in her ears than it should. The clerk handed her the sugar and flour, a small nod. Then a voice behind her cut through the murmurs like a blade. "Well, well, look what the cattle dragged in." She turned. Luke Carter, tall, confident, his smirk as fresh as it had been a half-decade ago when he tried to kiss her behind the old schoolhouse. She had refused him then, and refused him many times since. Now, his eyes held something amiss. Amusement, triumph, cruelty. "You still remember me, Elisa?" he drawled. "Or has sire memory faded living up in that big house with your husband?" She said nothing, but the color heated her cheeks. Her fingers curled into fists around the basket handle. Luke stepped closer. "Tell me, was it worth it selling yourself for a cow, or was it just airily good cow?" The store went silent. The murmurers stopped mid-breath. The clerk paused. The glass jars stopped rattling. Eliza steadied herself. "You do not know anything about me?" He sneered, leaning in. "Oh, I know plenty. I know you were a poor girl with too many dreams, and now you're just the old man's wife. Everyone knows it. Burning in its gossip. But inside them, she felt not just protected, but seen. Not just defended, but chosen. The ride home was quiet, but she no longer felt alone. The sky over Bitter Creek darkened early that day, not from storm clouds, but from the rising dust of hooves and the scent of danger. Caleb stood at the edge, his porch, rifle in hand. From the distance, a line of riders emerged, their silhouettes black against the raining sky. Banners of dust followed behind them, coiling like smoke from hell. "They are back," muttered Hank, the ranch foreman. "It is the same gang, only bigger now. They God, the Delancey gang." Years ago, Caleb had shot 3 off their men during a failed raid on the ranch. He thought it ended then, but vengeance, like drought, had a way of coming back harder. Eliza stood behind him. Her hands trembled, but her eyes burned with fire. What do they want? Water, Caleb said. Control the creek that runs through our land. It is the only one left flowing in 10 miles. Head turned to her, cupping her face. I need you to go. I will not. Eliza, you said Eom your wife, she interrupted, voice shaking. Then let me stand with you. I will not run from what I love. Caleb stared at her. Something in him broke, or perhaps something was finally rebuilt. He nodded. Then we fight. They barred the windows, loaded the guns, hid the horses. Caleb sent the ranch hands to protect the barns while he and Hank took the front line. When the gang reached the gates, their leader, a man with a scar cutting across his jaw, called out, "Give up the water, old man, or drown in blood." "Come, take it," Caleb replied. Gunfire cracked the air. The ranch exploded into chaos. Bullets screamed through the sky. Wood splintered. Fire burst from the hay barn. Caleb and Hank returned fire from the porch, holding the line. Eliza stayed inside, loading rifles, handing ammunition through the window with steady hands. Then a scream. Caleb turned. One of the outlaws had broken through the side gate, creeping around to flank them. The man raised his pistol at Caleb's back. But before he could shoot, Eliza burst from the doorway. She threw herself forward, grabbing the outlaw's arm just as the gun went off. The bullet missed Caleb, grazing the porch beam. Caleb spun, fired, and Thedeker fell. "Eliza!" he cried, rushing to her side. Her hands were shaking, her breath shallow. "I am all right," she whispered. "Just a bruise. You should have stayed inside. Let them take you," she whispered. Never. The sky turned black with smoke. Flames leapt from the barn. Screams echoed from both sides. Bitter Creek was burning, and so was everything they owned. Caleb pulled her close. "You've already lost everything once," he said, voice raw, trembling. "My wife, my child, my peace, but Eliza, I cannot lose you." She looked up at him, eyes wide with shock and something else. "Then do not," she whispered. They kissed amidst ash and gunfire as though the world had narrowed down to two hearts beating defiantly in the smoke. With renewed fury, Caleb rose and rallied his men. By dawn, the gang lay defeated or fold. The ranch smoldered but stood, and from its scorched soil, something new had taken root. The morning after, the gunfire faded. Bitter Creek was strangely quiet. Smoke still curled from the edges of the Archer Ranch like breath from a wounded animal. The barn lay half-burned. Its roof caved in and beams blackened with soot. Fences were snapped and scattered like matchsticks. The once tidy Wellard was trampled, Ames's of hoofprints, boot marks, and blood-soaked dirt. But the house, Caleb's house, still stood. Its paint was scorched, shutters cracked, but it was unbowed. It stood the way he had, scarred but proud. And inside it, so did Eliza. The Delancey gang was no more. Some of them were dead, left cold beneath the rising Sunday. The wounded groaned under the care of the sheriffsmen and were carted away toward justice. What the gang left behind wasn't just destruction. It was fear, yes, but also a strange new reverence. By noon, Bitter Creek began to change. Townsfolk arrived on foot and wagon, quiet and uncertain. Men who had once scoffed at Caleb Archer, the widowed recluse, the old bull, now tipped their hats in respectful silence. Some offered help with repairs. Others just stood by the fence line, not sure what to say. Women woe had whispered behind fans and laundry lines about the girl sold for a cow, brought warm loaves of bread wrapped in cloth and jugs of clean water. Their eyes, once sharp with gossip, were soft now, damp with shame, wide with awe. "She saved him," someone murmured outside the gate. "She stood her ground with him. That girl didn't run." And just like that, the story changed. No longer was Elisa Archer the bride who had been exchanged for livestock. She was something else now, a fighter. A woman who had carved her place into the hard stone of the West, not with words, but with grit and grace. Inside the house, Caleb moved with slow precision. His body ached in places long forgotten. He issued orders, patched broken hinges, and organized supplies. But every time past Eliza, his hand would brush hers. A fleeting touch, a reassurance, compromise spoken in silence. That evening, as the sky bled orange into a deep violet dusk, the two of them sat on the porch. Dust swirled gently across theirs. The wind was no longer a threat. Behind them, chickens clucked and picked through the ash as if nothing had ever happened. Caleb leaned back, his arm resting behind Eliza's shoulders. Not possessive, just present. His fingers brushed the fabric of her dress, torn and singed from battle, but she did not shrink from him. Eliza stared across the blackened pasture, where green shoots already dared to return. Her hands were scraped, her dress was stained, but her spine was straight, her chin lifted. "Do you think it's over?" she asked, her voice like a breeze across brittle grass. "For now," Caleb replied. After a long pause, he added quietly, "You should know. I have never trusted anyone the way I trust you." She turned to look at him, startled. He smiled. Not a smirker, a polite grin, but a true worn smile that softened every sharp edge of his weathered face. "I mean it," he said. "You didn't run. And because of that, neither did I." Eliza reached for his hand. Their fingers met and wove together, calloused and warm. They did not speak again. The porch creaked gently beneath them. A breeze lifted the scent of honeysuckle and smoke. Above them, the stars blinked to life over the still-beating heart of the Archer Ranch, and there, beneath the bruised sky, two souls sat steady, weathered, scarred, and unshaken. Together, spring came late to Bitter Creek that year, but when it arrived, it came like a quiet miracle. The cracked earth, once two hard fir seeds, softened beneath the gentle rains. Wildflowers sprang up in surprising places between fence posts along wagon ruts. Even through the soot-blackened corners of the barn, lilac spun in the breeze like old women dancing, while goldenrod lit up the pastures like candles flickering back to life. Prairie daisies swayed with bees clinging to their centers, as if the land itself had begun to breathe again. At the Archer Ranch, the pace slowed, but work never stopped. Caleb and Elisa rebuilt what had been lost. They cut new boards for the barn wall, hammered nails into fresh timber, rung the wire cross, the corral gate. Their hands were often covered in soil or calluses, but there was no tension in their movements, only ease, only rhythm. Their silence were no longer heavy. They were companionable, like an old song hummed under breath. One morning, Eliza knelt in the dirt near the well, pressing marigold roots into the earth beside sprigs of mint. The scent was sharp and dumpful. Behind her, Caleb approached with a canteen, his shirt damp with sweet, and handed it to her without a word. She smiled as she took it, brushing his fingers. He didn't flinch. Instead, he lingered just a moment longer. That afternoon, walking back from the far pasture, they paused by the new stretch of fencing Caleb had built. The sun dipped low, painting everything in amber. Eliza looked across the land, still scarred, still stubborn, but undeniably alive. "I used to think," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "that the day my father sold me to you for a cow was the day my life ended." She looked at him, eyes shining with something deeper than tears. "But it wasn't the end. Not even close. You gave something I didn't know I needed. A home, a choice, a future." Caleb looked at her. The lines of his face softened. "Not a trade," he said. "A beginning." She reached for his hand, and he took it without hesitation. They walked the fence line in the warm hush of spring, shadows stretching behind them, the scent of new blossoms in the air. The land was blooming again, and so wereth he. If this story moved your heart the way Eliza and Caleb moved each other's through hardship, healing, and the kind of love that grows in the most unlikely soil, then don't forget to hit that hype button and subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We bring you tales of love that defies time, scars that soften, and second chances found in dust and silence. More forbidden glances, redemptive endings, and romance under the open sky are waiting for you. This is not just the Wild West. This is where love fights, survives, and blooms. See you in the next story.